Welcome to the Dirthead Shed. I am Dave, and we are going to talk about Mom Spaghetti. This is my 1991 Ford F350 that I built for Ultimate Adventure this year. This was a huge undertaking, a whole new truck, and there's a whole bunch of trials and tribulations along the way. We're going to back up a minute. We're going to see how this thing did on Ultimate Adventure and see about a week before I headed out what kind of trouble I was in at the time. We are working in my garage right now on a personal project of mine I call Mom Spaghetti. This is a 1990 Ford F350, and I'm building this sort of rock crawler slash vintage desert racer hybrid truck, and the goal is to get this thing done and take it on Ultimate Adventure. Ultimate Adventure is like a week-long road trip, dirt road trip, camping trip, drive your rig, pack all your gear, eat out of this truck, sleep out of the truck, wheel the hardest trails, and then be able to take the street to the next set of obstacles. So, big project here. I've had this thing for 3 years, and it wasn't done until I had this gnarly deadline, and I'm 1 week away from having to leave for Ultimate Adventure. So let's go check out what I've done and what I got left to do. I went through, ditched those leaf springs, and I did a 3-link front suspension. This is sort of a universal kit from Barnes 4-wheel drive. I was able to use their bracketry, their heim joints. The front suspension is pretty much like it came out of the box from Barnes, but I changed up and I went with airbags for a front spring. This is just because I'm weird. This is not because they work better than something else. It is because I like airbags because I've been a lowrider guy all my life, and now I'm a rock crawler guy. So I have to do things backwards. It's going to have PSC hydraulic steering on it, stock steering box, but a hydraulic assist. These are all just stock brakes, but it's got fancy Yukon chromoly axle shafts and fancy racer guy U-joints, so that shouldn't break. Let's go to the back. The rear suspension is where it gets totally weird, lowrider mini truck guy. This, again, I started with a Barnes triangulated 4-link, but it's straight uppers and triangulated lowers. Sort of a weird setup, typically used for like a rock buggy that would have a fuel cell in this area, but I did it so that I could do this wacky cantilever or trailing arm rear link with an airbag on it to get a bunch of wheel travel out of it. This is not bolted on. When it's all said and done, that'll be attached to the link. But it's got that link kit, triangulated straight uppers, triangulated lowers, kind of an out-of-the-box kit. I used a bunch of the Barnes parts, and then I modified other things and made them work how I wanted. I did take the Sterling rear axle out of this truck because the Sterling is kind of junk. They're notorious for the tube spinning in the center chunk. And I put a Chevy 14 bolt in it. These are kind of a super beefy axle that you can get for cheap. I actually got this rear axle for $50, and it was out of like a 1980 Chevy K30. You'll notice it's a little more high clearance. I used a diff cover that allowed me to cut 1 1/8" off the bottom of the axle for more ground clearance. I believe that was from Barnes as well. Some of the other stuff that I've done to it: stock gas tank, you can see here. This is an 18-gallon just stock replacement fuel tank. Comes with the fuel pump. That was nice and cheap and got me a fresh new fuel pump and no rust. These are one of my favorite parts of the truck. This is a stock Ford Raptor internal bypass Fox shock, and they're just like a really cool shock that you can find cheap because guys that have Raptors seem to want to spend money and upgrade. So like these guys here, you can usually find them for like $200 a piece or something like that. So really cool technology that a lot of us can't afford if you're going to go out and buy like real race car stuff, but you can get the watered down version right off your Ford Raptor. And then going underneath, I can show you like sort of what started out good and what was lacking. This is a Zf5 transmission. So 5-speed, which means you get the overdrive, so you can still go down the highway. But because it was behind a small block Chevy, it's got like a granny low first gear. So it's got like a 6.7 to 1 first gear. So it'll have that low first gear rock crawler gear. And then behind that, I ditched the old chain-driven Ford, or who made it? I think it was a Borg-Warner transfer case. Ditched that, and I put in this off-road design Magnum crawl box to an old Ford NP205. So I've got basically dual transfer cases for all the low gears, but I still got that 5-speed up here so that I can go down the highway. One of the hardest things with Ultimate Adventure is it is ultimate. You are wheeling really difficult trails, and then you got to get in your truck and be able to drive, 200, 300, 400 miles the next day. So it's really difficult to build an off-road capable rig that can get on the highway and be safe to drive the next day. So that's like one of the biggest stressors I have right now. Is this wacky suspension going to work on the highway and off-road, or is it just going to do one or the other well? So I am going to work on this thing day and night for the next 7 days. I will be on the trip. We're going to wheel it hard. We're going to drive it hard on the highway, and then we'll see what holds up and what doesn't. So in reality, I have been dealing with this truck now for about 4 months. I took this thing on this epic journey right off the bat where it was 1,000 or 1,200 miles of on and off-road camping, living out of this truck, dealing with the problems it had along the way. Part of the reason I chose this truck was because I had been preaching that this thing, this body style, this Ford pickup is like the greatest starting point to begin with on a rock crawler. I started out with this thing because of small block Ford, so it's not super heavy, it's fuel injected, it has a huge transmission that's more designed for a diesel truck than a gas engine, so it's bulletproof. They come with this beefy front axle, they come with a good rear axle, and it's all in this package that's totally affordable. So if you heard about this truck and the name Mom Spaghetti, that is where it all stems from. I talked a bunch of smack about how good this truck is, and by the time I had to have it on the trail, it had to perform. So if you follow along on that footage, you'll see it dominating on trails and going down the highway, and it did really well. It did exactly what I set out to do. And now, 4 months later, it's got some oil leaks, it's got some problems, it's got some loose joints here and there, but it's still hanging in there, and it's still the truck that I was hoping for. UA is this bucket list trip that quite a few people have tried to go on. We get people that are readers of the magazine that would submit photos of their rigs, and they build a truck for years to try and go on this trip. It's kind of one of those deals where it stresses a lot of people out. They think that they have to have the perfect rig and all the spare parts to fix it for anything that may or may not go wrong. I go about it a little different because I've done it, I think, 12 times now. But I go about it sort of my own wild style where I build a truck and I basically test drive it on this trip. And I do break stuff and I do break down and I deal with it along the way. But it's sort of one of those things, like I thrive on that unknown. A lot of people plan and overpack and they almost break parts because they're hauling so many spares. Whereas I kind of feel like I would rather test it, drive it, break it, figure it out along the way, because I kind of, like, as soon as stuff goes sideways, that's when it starts getting good. So the truck, I was stoked on how it performed. This is my first full-size rig as far as like a legit wheeling rig, and going from mini trucks and Suzuki Samurais and Jeeps to building this monster. It's pretty intimidating, like figuring out how you're going to squeeze this like big heavy truck down a Jeep trail. One of the things I wanted to make sure when I built this was it didn't feel heavy when I was wheeling it. That's why I went for that small block Ford in it, and I shortened it up and I built like a lightweight bed for it. A lot of people will like build heavy thinking it's going to make it strong, but in the long run you end up stressing parts. So this thing, it worked great. It wheels like a mini truck. It gets good traction. It is wide, as you can see by that fender where I smashed it into a tree, but all in all, like, this thing did amazing. It gets the traction you want when you need the traction. That wacky suspension that I did, it actually articulates and flexes, and you know, you can't beat it when you line up for a tough obstacle and you actually make it. Sometimes, like, those obstacles are pretty intimidating. There was a certain one at Katimsi Rocks that was just this massive hill climb, and you get partway up it, and then you got to fully commit. And like, knowing that the thing was going to get traction when I needed it, and the throttle was going to work when I needed it, and slipping the clutch was working, I was stoked. One of the things that I was really stoked on this truck was the fact that before I left, I hadn't even hardly run this thing, and I did the oil change on it, and this thing had just sludge barely dripping out of the oil pan. I mean, it was like the nasty, it was thicker than honey. Like, you've heard about sludge as thick as molasses, and this was as bad as it gets. So I had gone to change the oil in it, and it would barely even pour out of the oil pan. So sludge buildup is something that happens, like on this truck, I think, because it was idled for many, many hours. I think this was a railroad truck or something in Canada before I got it. So had all this sludge buildup in the engine. I took it on a 1,000-mile trip, not even knowing if this thing was going to have oil pressure. So I think the biggest stressor that I had, more so than any of the fab work and hoping that like the transmission didn't fall out of it, was if the engine was going to blow up, which it didn't. So I've talked a lot of smack about how good this truck is, but the problem this truck has is it's not good looking. That bullnose, or the brick nose Ford, the 1990 front end, 1990-91 front end, is like the ugliest Ford ever made. And I'm not going to back down from that. It's an ugly truck. This thing had these terrible composite headlights that were yellow and nasty. And yes, you can spend a bunch of money and put fancy headlights in it, or you can go and get yourself some junkyard parts like I did and put this old bullnose front end on it. That's a 1980 front clip. That's why this truck doesn't look like a 90, because we like changed everything about it. 1980 front fenders, 1980 grill, headlights, and hood. And I did that because I liked the look of this. I like the big chrome bezels around the headlights, the big chrome grill. I like the regular old school rectangular headlights. If you look at the back, you'll notice that it's a step side. When I bought this, it was actually, would have been a fleet side long bed, and now it is a short bed step side, and the bed and all that stuff is custom made. The fenders are actually factory 1980 to 1986 Ford step side bed fenders, and all of that stuff, when we did the modifications to it, you can see all that on an episode of Dirt Every Day, where Fred came up and he helped me with this front clip swap while I started building the bed and getting those fenders fit up. And then we'll also kick that back to the first day of Ultimate Adventure. So all this talk about Ultimate Adventure, you can actually go and see day one of it on Dirt Every Day, where we build the truck and we go and rip around on this awesome trail in Oklahoma. And then if you want to see the footage of the entire trip, Ultimate Adventure was 7 days long, and there's footage of everything about it. And that's going to be on Motor Trend's YouTube channel as well as Motor Trend's app. You can find all that footage there. You can also go back years and years and see all these other goofball trucks that Fred and I have built along the way and wheeled with our buddies. So that's pretty much it for this. I've got this truck for a long time. It's not going anywhere. I have owned it now for 3 years. I've driven it for about 3 months, and I got a lot more time behind the wheel ahead of me. Sweet. Thank you for following along on this build so far. It's been a joy to build this cool truck and get to show it off. If you have any questions about it, go ahead and shoot me all the questions you want. If you have ideas for the future, you can send some of those my way. I'll be checking out all these comments and responding as much as I can. Get out there, build yourself a truck. If you've got an old Ford truck like this behind the barn, it's a good start. But it doesn't actually have to be this one here. You can build yourself a little Jeep Cherokee. You can build yourself whatever you want. It's just a matter of getting out there and having fun. Thanks for watching.